The rain had been falling for hours, tracing silver rivers down the glass walls of Harrison Tech's 50th floor. The city outside glimmered in shades of blue and white, a sleepless orchestra of lights beneath the storm. Inside the building was quiet, except for the low hum of computers and the occasional click from an elevator arriving on a distant floor. It was past 2 in the morning when Graham Harrison, founder and CEO, stepped out of the conference room. His tie hung loose around his neck, his shirt sleeves rolled exhaustion shadowing the sharpness of his face. He had spent the last 14 hours reviewing investor documents for the company's upcoming IPO, but the fatigue he felt was not only physical. It was the kind that lived in the bones in the space left by years of control, regret, and solitude. He was halfway to the elevator when something caught his eye. Through the open door of the PR division, a faint glow flickered across the room. At first, he thought it was one of the screens left on standby, but as he stepped closer, he saw her, Evelyn Moore, the new communications executive, the one Lena from HR had spoken about. She sat slumped over her desk, head resting on her folded arms, the laptop screen still on an unfinished presentation open before her. The pale light washed over her face, softening the tired lines around her mouth. A strand of hair clung to her cheek, damp from tears that had long since dried. Graham paused in the doorway, silent, studying her. The office around her was a forest of cold steel and polished glass, yet there was something disarmingly human in the way she looked, unguarded, real, almost fragile. It had been years since he had seen anyone fall asleep in this building. People here were machines. They thrived on ambition, caffeine, and fear. And yet here she was, small against the vastness of the room, asleep amid the wreckage of deadlines and dreams. A part of him wanted to walk away, to leave her undisturbed, to keep the distance that had always protected him. But his eyes lingered on her trembling hand. Even in sleep, she looked like someone bracing for disappointment. The sight unsettled him. On the coat rack near the door hung his jacket, a soft charcoal gray. Without thinking, he took it and walked over. The faint scent of coffee and rain lingered in the air. When he reached her desk, he hesitated. Up close, he could see that she was young, maybe late 20s, but her expression carried a weight far older. A closed notebook lay beside her, the words, "You are enough," scribbled faintly on the cover. He placed the jacket gently over her shoulders. For a moment he stood there, his shadow falling across her and the faint rhythm of her breathing. The urge to say something came unexpectedly, rising from a place he thought long sealed. His voice was low, barely a whisper. No one should work this hard just to prove they are worth staying for. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. He had not meant for her to hear yet. As soon as the sentence escaped, her eyelashes fluttered. Her eyes opened hazy at first, then wide. She froze, as if waking into a dream she did not understand. The man standing over her was not just her boss. It was Graham Harrison, the untouchable billionaire, the man whose name appeared on the company's glass entrance in silver letters. For a long second, neither of them moved. The only sound was the rain. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He straightened, stepping back as though distance could undo the intimacy of what he had just said. "I am sorry," he murmured. "You were—" He paused, searching for something professional to fill the space between them. "Working late." She blinked, trying to gather herself. Her cheeks flushed, and she pulled the jacket closer without realizing it. "I did not mean to fall asleep, sir." He gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Most people do not mean to," he said. "Sometimes it just happens when the world stops watching." His gaze drifted briefly toward the skyline, where the storm continued its slow, steady percussion. Then he looked back at her. "You should go home, Miss Moore. It is late." She nodded quickly, still processing the moment, still feeling the echo of his voice, the strange gentleness hidden inside it. "Thank you," she said softly, though she was not sure whether she meant for the jacket, the mercy, or the words he had not taken back. He gave a small nod, then turned away, his footsteps quiet against the marble floor. When the elevator doors closed behind him, Evelyn sat for a long time staring at the empty hallway. Her pulse was still unsteady. His words replayed in her head like a song she could not turn off. No one should work this hard just to prove they are worth staying for. She pulled the jacket tighter, breathing in the faint warmth that lingered in its fabric. Outside, the storm began to ease, and somewhere deep inside her, a wall she had built for years cracked just enough for light to get in. Morning spilled into the city like a blade of light cutting through the gray that had lingered since dawn. The 50 floors of Harrison Tech reflected the skyline, all steel and symmetry, a monument to order and ambition. Evelyn stepped out of the elevator, clutching her coffee, praying no one had seen her leaving the building at nearly 3 in the morning. But the whispers had already started. The communications floor was alive with the soft hum of gossip, the kind that traveled faster than an email. They said the CEO himself had found her asleep. They said she still had a job. That was the part no one could understand. She sat at her desk, pretending not to hear, trying to focus on the proposal she had rewritten 3 times. Her phone buzzed, a message from HR meeting at 10 with the executive team. Her stomach dropped. She had survived the night, but perhaps not the aftermath. Across the glass atrium, the executives gathered for the weekly PR meeting. Graham Harrison entered last calm, unreadable. He walked with the kind of quiet authority that silenced rooms without raising his voice. Evelyn avoided his gaze, fixing her eyes on the notes in her lap. The table was long transparent, its polished surface reflecting every nervous hand. The meeting began with quarterly updates, projections, slides of color-coded optimism. It was all noise until he spoke. "Ms. Moore," Graham said suddenly, his tone even. "What do you think truth sounds like in a world that sells perfection?" The room went silent. Even the projector seemed to dim. Evelyn looked up, startled. Around her 20 pairs of eyes waited for her to fail. She swallowed, her heart hammering. "Truth," she said quietly, "sounds like something we forgot how to hear." A pause, then a faint nod from him, a glimmer of something close to approval. "Thank you, Ms. Moore. That will be all." The meeting continued, but her pulse did not slow. When it ended, Lena Cho from HR brushed past her, whispering, "You just made him smile. That is a first." Evelyn blinked. Smile. She had not noticed. All she could think of was the question, the way his voice had found her again among the polished walls. By noon, the whispers had changed tone. Some said the CEO had taken interest in the new PR hire. Others joked that she had a guardian angel in a tailored suit. She tried to ignore it, but when she passed the executive hallway, his office door was open. Through the glass, she saw him standing by the window, watching the rain streak down the skyline like veins of light. He looked like someone who had forgotten how to rest. She almost walked away, but he turned, catching her reflection. "Miss Moore, come in," he said. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The office was vast, minimalist, the kind of place where silence had a presence. He gestured toward a seat, but did not sit himself. "I wanted to apologize for last night," he began. "You should not have been here that late. I should not have startled you. It was unprofessional." She shook her head quickly. "No apology needed, sir. I was behind schedule and I did not realize the time. I am grateful you did not." She stopped herself. "Fire me." He finished for her, a faint amusement in his tone. She blushed. Something like that. He studied her for a moment, as if seeing through every wall she tried to build. "You work hard," he said simply. "Too hard, maybe." She smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Hard work is the only currency that has never failed me." He nodded slowly, then turned back toward the window. The city reflected in the glass made it seem as if he were standing between two worlds, the one outside and the one he built. "You said something today," he continued, "about truth being something we forgot how to hear. Where did that come from?" She hesitated. "From losing it, I guess. From realizing that pretending is easier." For a long moment he said nothing. Then softly, as if to himself, he murmured, "Pretending keeps the walls clean, but it also keeps everyone out." She looked at him, unsure if he was still talking to her or to the ghost of someone else. Then the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Harrison, the board is ready for you." He turned toward her, professional again. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Moore." Before she left, he said one last thing. "You did good work on the brand proposal. It is rare to find honesty written between metrics." She nodded, confused but grateful. As the door closed behind her, she realized her hands were trembling. The rest of the day passed in fragments, the clatter of keyboards, the echo of heels against marble, the reflection of her own face in 100 panels of glass. By evening, the office emptied out, and she sat alone at her desk again. The jacket he had given her the night before was folded neatly beside her laptop. She ran her fingers along its sleeve, feeling the fabric, the quiet weight of what had not been said. Outside, the storm had stopped. The city looked cleaner, sharper, alive again. She glanced up toward the top floors where the executive offices glowed faintly. For a second, she wondered if he was still there, watching the same skyline, wondering the same thing she was, why a single whisper could feel louder than years of silence. Evelyn had always believed that betrayal did not happen in an instant, that it came in quiet increments, a missed call, a borrowed idea, a promise postponed until it no longer meant anything. She had learned that lesson the hard way a year ago in Chicago, at a sleek marketing agency that prided itself on innovation but fed on competition. She had spent months building a campaign that blended data science with storytelling, the kind that could redefine a company's image. Her boyfriend at the time, Derek Blake, was her creative partner, her closest confidant, and the person she trusted most. He was charming in a calculated way, the kind of man who made ambition look effortless. They shared long nights, late dinners, and whispered dreams of starting their own agency one day. Then came the pitch meeting that changed everything. Evelyn watched as Derek stood before the board and presented her idea as his own word for word. The room applauded, the investors approved, and when her turn came, there was nothing left to say. That night, he told her it was just business, that she should not take it personally, that he had done what anyone would have done in his position. 2 weeks later, he was promoted and she was quietly let go under the guise of restructuring. She packed her desk in silence, numb but awake for the first time in months. The man she had loved looked at her with professional detachment, as though she were nothing more than collateral damage in his climb. She left Chicago the next morning, boarding a train to New York, with nothing but her laptop, 2 suitcases, and a heart that no longer trusted its own instincts. She told herself she would rebuild, that she would bury the softness that made her vulnerable. Love, she decided, was a luxury people could not afford in a world built on self-interest. At Harrison Tech, she worked like a machine, polite, precise, invisible. She built walls made of polite smiles and late hours, and no one ever asked what lay behind them. Until Graham Harrison. The day after the board meeting, she caught him in the hallway speaking with Lena Cho. Their conversation was casual, but there was a quiet intimacy between them, the familiarity of two people who had seen each other's scars. When he noticed her, he stopped mid-sentence. "Miss Moore," he said, "would you have a moment?" She nodded, surprised. He gestured toward the interview lounge, a smaller, quieter space lined with books and photographs. On one wall hung an old picture of a prototype server room wires sprawling like veins. "I was just telling Lena about this," he said. "It was our first office back when Harrison Tech was 3 engineers and a coffee machine. You would not believe how proud I was of a room that small." She smiled faintly. It must have felt like the start of something unstoppable. He looked at the photograph for a long moment before replying. "It felt like a promise I did not keep." Lena excused herself, leaving them alone. He motioned for her to sit. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "When did you stop believing people meant what they say?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated. "Around the time someone proved they did not." He nodded, as if he understood exactly. "You are not alone in that," he said. "I once thought love was a contract, clear terms, mutual benefit, exit clauses. But contracts do not stop the fire when it comes." She frowned slightly. "Fire." He exhaled, his gaze drifting toward the window. "My wife Nora was killed in an apartment fire 3 years ago. Faulty wiring. But that is not the part that keeps me awake. The part that does is what happened before that night." He paused, the words deliberate, as though he had rehearsed them in his mind, but never aloud. "I had discovered she was having an affair. We argued and I walked out. I told myself I would come back when I was calm. I never got that chance. By the time I returned, there was nothing left but smoke and sirens." For the first time since she had met him, Evelyn saw not the CEO, not the billionaire who commanded rooms, but a man stripped of armor. She wanted to say something, but nothing seemed enough. "I am sorry," she whispered. He nodded. "People say time heals, but it does not. It just rearranges the pain until it fits into your day." Her chest tightened with recognition. That was exactly how it felt, her own heartbreak neatly folded into her daily routine, disguised as strength. She looked at him and saw her reflection in his silence. "Maybe," she said softly, "we both learned how to survive, but not how to stop." His eyes met hers, a flicker of warmth beneath the grief. "Maybe that is why you are here, Miss Moore. Maybe that is why you caught my attention." She blinked, startled. "Because I fell asleep at my desk." "No," he said, almost smiling. "Because you still care enough to be tired. Most people stopped caring long before that." The intercom buzzed again, breaking the moment. "The board meeting in 5 minutes, sir." He stood, smoothing his jacket. "Thank you for listening," he said. "For what it is worth, betrayal only defines you if you let it." She watched him leave, the echo of his words lingering like an unfinished sentence. That night, as she rode the subway home, she replayed the conversation over and over. The noise of the city faded into the background, replaced by the rhythm of rain against glass. Two people who had lost everything to the same wound had somehow found each other inside a building of steel and silence. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt something stir beneath the ashes of her cynicism. Not hope exactly, but the faint memory of what it once felt like to believe. By February, the winter had turned the Hudson River into a sheet of dull glass, and the city outside looked frozen mid-breath. Inside Harrison Tech, everything moved at an accelerated pace. The IPO date loomed like a sunrise no one could stop, and the marketing department worked under pressure so intense that even silence seemed to vibrate. Evelyn had been promoted unofficially to lead the Ethics and AI Transparency campaign, a project meant to present Harrison Tech as a symbol of accountability in a world losing faith in corporations. The irony was not lost on her. Most of the data she received came from the sustainability and finance departments, neatly packaged, flawless, and suspiciously perfect. Every number told the same story: zero waste, zero energy discrepancy, zero human error. It was too immaculate to be real. She ran the figures 3 times, cross-checked them against the archived files on the internal cloud, and noticed something strange. 2 of the quarterly reports shared identical timestamps, identical file sizes, and yet claimed to have been generated 6 months apart. That was impossible. Someone had cloned data and replaced the real metrics. She brought it to her supervisor, who brushed her off with a smile that felt more like a warning. "Don't get lost in the weeds, Evelyn. The narrative matters more than the numbers." But she could not let it go. That night, after most of the office had gone home, she stayed behind, scrolling through spreadsheets until the lines blurred. The pattern emerged slowly, like a ghost revealing itself every falsified document, traced back to one name on the approval logs: Derek Blake, Chief Financial Officer of Titan Dynamics, a major partner company involved in the merger. For a moment, the air left her lungs. She zoomed in on the signature, reading it over and over. Derek Blake, the man who had stolen her work, her pride, and every illusion she had about loyalty. He had found a way to rise even higher, and now his signature sat under the company's ethical disclosures. The irony burned. She sat motionless for several seconds before the realization sank in that the scam was bigger than personal revenge. It was a crime. She gathered the printouts, stuffed them into a folder, and walked straight to the executive floor. The security guard glanced at her badge and opened the glass doors without question. The office was dark, except for the faint glow spilling from Graham Harrison's door. He was there, sitting behind his desk, reviewing documents with the same intensity he gave everything. When he looked up and saw her, surprise flickered across his face. "Miss Moore, you are working late again." She hesitated in the doorway, the folder clutched tight to her chest. "I found something." His expression sharpened. "Come in." She placed the folder on his desk and opened it, spreading the pages carefully. The numbers don't add up. The timestamps are identical and the files were cloned. Whoever did this falsified the sustainability reports for at least 2 quarters. He scanned the documents quickly, his eyes narrowing. "And you are sure about this positive?" "And that's not all." She flipped to the last page, her voice tightening. The final approvals were issued by a partner company. The CFO's name is Derek Blake. The silence between them thickened. He leaned back slowly, the weight of recognition visible on his face. "That name," he paused, "means something to you." She nodded. "He used to work with me. He used to be someone I trusted." Graham regarded her for a long moment. "You've been lied to before," he said finally, "so you know what truth costs." His words struck her like an echo from their first meeting. She exhaled, her voice steady but quiet. "What are you going to do?" He looked down at the pages, the city lights reflecting off the glass behind him like fractured stars. "If these numbers are real, the IPO could collapse before it launches. Investors will pull out. People will lose jobs." Then he looked at her again, his tone softer. "And if they are true, it means this company has been selling a lie." She met his gaze. "Then maybe it deserves to fall." For the first time, his composure broke into a faint smile, one that carried equal parts admiration and sadness. "You remind me of myself 10 years ago." She frowned. "What happened 10 years ago?" I thought integrity alone could fix the world." He closed the folder, resting his hand on it. "I learned that integrity needs strategy or it dies unheard." He stood and walked toward the window, hands in his pockets. "Do you trust me, Miss Moore?" The question caught her off guard. "I barely know you," she admitted, "but you keep showing up even when you could look away. That counts for something." He turned back toward her, the city lights outlining his frame like a silhouette carved from conviction and loneliness. "Then trust that I'll handle this. For now, tell no one. Let me see who else is involved." She hesitated. "That man Derek, he's dangerous when cornered. He'll find a way to twist it." Graham's voice was calm but certain. "Then we'll untwist it first." She nodded slowly, her pulse steadying, not because she felt safe, but because she believed him. As she left his office, she caught her reflection in the glass corridor walls. Behind her, Graham stood watching the skyline, the folder open in his hand. Two people who no longer believed in trust had just agreed to fight for the truth together. In the elevator, Evelyn leaned against the mirrored wall, closing her eyes. Her phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "Still chasing ghosts," Evie it read. She froze. The sender ID D. Blake. Her heart pounded. The ghost had found her first. The next evening, the office emptied earlier than usual. Outside, the February wind carried snow like ash, drifting against the tall glass windows that turned the city into a reflection of itself. Evelyn stayed behind, pretending to revise campaign notes, though her real focus lay on the encrypted files Graham had sent her under a simple message review, carefully. "Delete after reading." Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. It contained internal security logs, untouched data points, and correspondence between Titan Dynamics and Harrison Tech's accounting servers. The numbers aligned perfectly with her suspicions. Someone had installed a backdoor program that replicated ideal performance metrics while hiding the true ones underneath, all funneled through Titan's servers. Derek's signature was everywhere. She stared at the screen until her eyes blurred, trying to reconcile the man she had once loved with the liar she was now exposing. She wanted to feel triumph, but only felt tired. A notification pinged, "Access request Graham Harrison." She granted it. Seconds later, his icon appeared in the upper corner of her monitor. "Still working late, Miss Moore." The message appeared in the chat window, casual but aware. "Old habits die hard," she replied. Then, before she could overthink it, she added, "I found proof. He's been fabricating data for months." A moment later came his response. "I'm in conference room 3. Bring it here." And Evelyn trust no one else. She gathered her files, slid her laptop into her bag, and took the stairs instead of the elevator. The corridor lights dimmed at night, sensors clicking softly as she moved past. The glass walls caught her reflection, a woman holding fragments of the truth, uncertain whether it would save her or destroy her. Graham stood by the projection wall when she entered, sleeves rolled, tie gone. The city glowed behind him, a map of light and consequence. He turned as she approached, and for a moment they simply regarded each other, two people who had lived too long in silence. She placed the laptop on the table and opened the file. The blue light washed over them as the numbers flickered to life. "Here," she said quietly, pointing to the pattern. "See the repetition, it's synthetic data. And the approval logs all route through this server, registered to Titan's CFO account." Graham leaned closer, his hand brushing hers as he scrolled. The brief contact startled her, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was real. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of someone who had seen everything fall apart and still kept building. He didn't pull away, You realize what this means, he said. If we take this public, it won't just expose Titan, it will hit us too. The stock could crash before the IPO. So you'll bury it? She asked. He looked up sharply. No. I said if we take it public, not if we should. I won't hide the truth, but we need evidence that can't be erased. He walked to the server display on the wall and brought up a master access panel. I'll give you full clearance to the system logs, he said. You can walk away right now and pretend you never saw this, or you can look deeper. But if you choose to look, you'll be part of it. There's no halfway. She hesitated. You're giving me executive access? That's risky, I know, he said. That's why it's a test. His voice softened, almost tender. Sometimes we test people not to catch them, but to let them trust themselves again. The words hit her harder than she expected. She met his gaze and nodded. Then I'll look. They spent hours cross-referencing the data. The room grew colder as the night deepened, the only sound the hum of servers and the occasional crackle of the heating system. At one point, she removed her jacket, realizing he had been watching her, not in the way men watched, but as if he were trying to remember something he had forgotten about human closeness. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Because you remind me of what this place used to mean, he said, before it became a machine for numbers. She looked at him, trying to decipher the sadness beneath his control. And what did it mean back then? It meant purpose, integrity, maybe even hope. His eyes found hers again. You make me believe it could mean that again. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was a silence that held things unspoken: gratitude, curiosity, attraction. The kind of silence that becomes its own language. She turned back to the screen, typing commands with renewed focus. Together they uncovered a hidden line of code embedded in the server's backup directory, a digital fingerprint that led directly to Titan's system. Graham whistled softly. That's brilliant, he said. You caught what none of my analysts did. She smiled faintly. I guess betrayal teaches you to pay attention, or to never stop doubting, he replied. But doubt can be a virtue if it keeps you honest. Around midnight, the building's automatic lights shut off, leaving only the dim glow of the monitors. The reflection of the city shimmered across the table, turning their faces into mirror images. Evelyn's eyes felt heavy, but she forced herself to keep going. You should get some rest, Graham said. I'll finish this. No, she replied, almost defensive. I started it. I'll finish it. He watched her fingers move across the keyboard, and without realizing it, smiled. The expression felt foreign on his face, but not unpleasant. When the final report compiled, she sat back and exhaled. Done, she whispered. Graham reached over, closing her laptop gently. Good work, he said, and thank you for not walking away. She looked at him, the flickering blue light tracing the sharp lines of his jaw. I don't quit anymore, she said softly. Not when something still feels right. His eyes lingered on hers, and for a brief second the distance between them disappeared. Then, as if by instinct, they both stepped back, returning to the safe professionalism that kept them from falling apart. Tomorrow, he said, his tone composed again. We verify the data against Titan's physical backups. If they match, we move to containment and legal. And if they don't, then we dig deeper, he said. And we trust each other until we find the truth. She nodded. When she left the room, her reflection in the glass looked different, still, tired, still uncertain, but stronger somehow, as if part of her had been rewritten by that trust. Behind her, Graham stood alone in the quiet, staring at the city that mirrored his own fragility. For the first time in years, he realized he was no longer the only one awake. By the end of the week, the city had turned sharp and brittle under the late winter sun, and inside Harrison Tech, the atmosphere was no warmer. The higher the stock price climbed, the tenser the air became. People smiled harder, spoke faster, and avoided eye contact as if every secret might be reflected in the glass walls around them. Evelyn felt that pressure pressing down on her like a hand at the back of her neck, but every night she and Graham kept working. Their late hours became a rhythm of quiet collaboration, coffee cups gone cold and monitors humming like sleepless hearts. They were no longer two strangers testing boundaries, but two people orbiting the same secret. The first breakthrough came on a Thursday night when the building was nearly empty. Evelyn sat on the floor of the IT room, surrounded by cables and open laptops, while Graham crouched beside her tracing network paths with the precision of an engineer and the focus of a man chasing ghosts. Every server log pointed back to a phantom directory, a storage segment that did not officially exist but somehow kept generating perfect data. It was the ghost in the system, the invisible hand feeding false metrics to Titan and by extension to Harrison Tech's financial reports. When they finally isolated the code, Evelyn's breath caught. It had been written months before the IPO talks began, under a fake maintenance ID registered to Titan Dynamics, but hidden within the Harrison firewall. The author's alias was simple but devastatingly familiar, DB Lake 72. Her heart dropped. She stared at the name until the letters blurred. Graham saw her expression and understood before she spoke. It's him. His voice was low-controlled, but the anger beneath it rippled like static. He's inside our network. Evelyn nodded, unable to look away from the screen. And he's still accessing it. See the timestamp. The most recent edit had been made 40 minutes ago. That meant Derek Blake was still active right now. Graham straightened his shoulders, the tension in his jaw unmistakable. Then we catch him. He opened a secure channel to the cybersecurity division, instructing them to stay off the grid, no emails, no calls, only encrypted relay. Within minutes, they had a mirrored copy of the hidden directory sealed from the mainframe like a captured heartbeat. The deeper they went, the more terrifyingly elegant the fraud became. Derek's system had generated synthetic efficiency reports that fooled automated audits by cross-referencing fake energy output with falsified ESG metrics. It was corporate art, a crime dressed as perfection. Evelyn's stomach twisted. He was always good at making lies look beautiful. Graham looked at her, a muscle ticking in his cheek. Then let's make truth look unstoppable. Hours passed. Outside the windows, the lights of Manhattan flickered like neurons firing in a giant brain. Inside the room, everything narrowed to the steady dance of code on the screen. At some point, Evelyn realized that Graham had taken off his jacket, draped it over the chair beside her, and rolled up his sleeves. There was something intimate about seeing him like that, stripped of the armor everyone else feared. He was quiet, but when he spoke, every word carried intent. You said he hurt you before. She nodded her eyes on the code. He took what I built and made it his. And when I called him out, he said I was naive to think ideas belonged to anyone. And you believed him for a while, she said softly. Until I stopped believing anyone. Graham leaned closer, watching her hands move over the keyboard. Maybe believing the wrong person doesn't mean you were foolish, he said. Maybe it means you still had hope left. She looked up at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Do you? He paused. Not much, but sometimes people like you make me remember what it felt like. The silence that followed was fragile and heavy. She turned back to the screen before her emotions betrayed her. Around 2 a.m., they hit another wall, a line of encrypted data sealed with a corporate key only top executives at Titan could access. Evelyn frowned. He's hidden something here. This isn't just numbers, it's correspondence. Graham's eyes narrowed. Decrypt it. She hesitated. If I do, we'll be crossing into criminal territory. He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. We're already there. She typed the command. The encryption cracked open, revealing dozens of archived messages between Titan executives and Derek. The words painted a picture of deliberate manipulation. Titan had promised inflated performance in exchange for early investor payouts, and Derek had brokered the falsification through Harrison Tech's systems to mask their emissions output. It was more than a data crime, it was environmental fraud worth billions. Evelyn leaned back, stunned. If this gets out, the IPO's dead? The board will crucify you. Graham shook his head. Let them. I'd rather bury the company than live on a lie. His voice was steady, but she could see the storm behind his calm. Years of control, years of trying to be the man who never broke, now hanging by a thread. She reached out, touching his wrist lightly. You don't have to carry it alone. He looked at her hand, then at her face. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a shared exhaustion that felt dangerously close to tenderness. You shouldn't have to carry it either, he said. But you're here. Because you asked, she said simply, and because someone has to prove not everyone lies. He smiled faintly, but his eyes softened in a way that made her pulse quicken. They worked until dawn, tracing the digital footprints like detectives following fading light. When they finally finished the report, the sun was rising over the Hudson, painting the skyline gold. Evelyn stretched her aching shoulders and turned to find Graham watching her, not with authority, but with something warmer, something human. You should sleep, he said quietly. You look like you've fought a war. I feel like I did. She smiled weakly. Did we win? Not yet, he replied, but we're closer. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion washing over her. The hum of the servers became a lullaby, the room spinning in slow motion. When she drifted off against the back of the chair, he stood there for a long time, just looking at her. There was peace in her face that he had not seen in anyone for years. He reached for the blanket hanging by the door and draped it over her shoulders. Then quietly, he whispered to the sleeping room more than to her. You don't have to run anymore. His voice was barely audible, but she stirred faintly as if hearing it somewhere deep in her dreams. He stayed until the first rays of sun touched the glass, then walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and coffee. When Evelyn woke an hour later, the monitors still glowed with the results of their search. On her laptop screen was a new message from him. Meeting at 9. Bring everything. Trust yourself. She smiled tiredly, running her hand through her hair. For the first time in years, she didn't dread what the morning would bring. In a world built on facades and false perfection, they had found something dangerously rare, the beginning of trust. Friday night came with a strange stillness, the kind that settles before storms. The building was half empty as employees rushed to start their weekends, unaware that the foundation of everything they worked for was already cracking beneath them. Evelyn and Graham had spent the day preparing a confidential report to send to legal counsel and the board. The data they'd uncovered proved massive fraud enough to derail the IPO and implicate Titan Dynamics at the highest level. But as they finalized the encrypted documentation, something in the system changed. A red alert blinked across the monitor. Unauthorized access detected. The message read, Evelyn's pulse spiked. "It's the ghost directory," she whispered. "Someone's in there right now." Graham leaned over her shoulder, his expression tightening. "Can you trace it?" "Trying." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "The access is coming from inside the building." The words barely left her mouth before the lights flickered. Then the alarm sounded, a deep, mechanical wail that sliced through the silence of the 50th floor. Graham grabbed the emergency phone barking orders to security. "Cut main power to server block 3. Lock down elevators." But before he finished the command, a second alarm blared, "Fire suppression failure. Smoke detection active." Evelyn looked toward the corridor and saw the faint gray mist curling beneath the door. Her heart lurched. "The server room," she said. "It's on that floor." "Stay here," Graham ordered, already moving toward the exit. She followed him despite his protest. The hallway lights strobed as they ran the glass walls, flashing red and white like a city on fire. The air grew thicker with each step, acrid and metallic. When they reached the stairwell, a wave of heat hit them full in the face. The fire suppression system had failed completely, and from the vent shafts came the low, crackling roar of electrical flames feeding on synthetic cable insulation. Graham grabbed the railing, coughing. Someone triggered a manual override. He shouted over the noise, "This isn't an accident." Evelyn's mind reeled. "Derek," she gasped, "he's covering his tracks." They pushed through the door onto the server floor where chaos met them like a living thing. Smoke rolled in heavy clouds, illuminated by the red glow of emergency lights. Sparks rained from the ceiling as panels melted, dripping onto the polished floor like burning glass. Somewhere in the haze, the building's automated voice repeated, "Evacuate immediately. Hazard level critical." Evelyn's throat burned as she shouted, "The evidence, it's stored here." Graham caught her arm. "We get you out first." "No," she said, coughing. "If he wipes the drive, everything's gone." She broke free, running toward the glass-walled server chamber. The door was locked with an automatic seal, heat sensors preventing entry. Through the smoke, she could see flickering flames licking up from the mainframe cables. She pounded on the keypad. "Come on, come on." Graham appeared beside her, forcing the emergency override with his security card. The lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for her to slip through. The air inside was worse, a furnace of heat and smoke. She stumbled to the terminal, hacking through the backup access code. The files began uploading to the cloud archive. Progress bar 12%. She coughed violently, eyes stinging. "It's not fast enough," she shouted. "Keep it going," Graham yelled from outside. He disappeared into the haze, and she heard the sound of metal clanging. He was trying to redirect airflow through the ceiling ducts. The upload ticked upward, 38%, 62% in, or 79%. Then the building shuddered. A transformer somewhere in the subfloor exploded, sending a shockwave through the steel beams. The door behind her slammed shut. "Graham," she screamed, pounding against it. The lock reset. "Step back," he shouted from the other side. Through the frosted glass, she saw his silhouette ramming the emergency lever with a metal bar. The heat was unbearable now. Her lungs felt raw, her head spinning. "Leave it," she gasped. "You'll get yourself killed. I've lost one woman to the fire once," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Not again." Her heart stopped. In that moment, the words didn't sound like a memory, they sounded like a vow. The bar gave way with a metallic snap. He forced the door open, a rush of smoke pouring out as he grabbed her by the waist and pulled her into the corridor. She stumbled against his chest, coughing, half-blinded. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the stairwell. Alarms wailed, sprinklers hissed uselessly against the blaze, and the floor beneath them trembled as flames ate through wiring. The files, she rasped. Did they upload? He held her close as they moved. They're safe, he said. You did it. They reached the stairwell only to find it filled with smoke so thick it was like walking through water. The exit light flickered faintly above. Evelyn's legs gave out, and he caught her pulling her against him. Stay awake, he said firmly, his voice low but urgent. Breathe through your shirt. She tried, but her lungs rebelled. The world tilted. He lifted her in his arms, carrying her through the haze as alarms blared and fire crackled behind them. The emergency lights painted everything red, and for a surreal moment, she thought of how ironic it was that a company built on transparency could hide so many lies behind glass. As they neared the landing, the building's main sprinkler system roared to life. Cold water cascaded from above, hissing as it met flame. Graham stumbled, slipping but holding her tight. The shock of water snapped her halfway back to consciousness. Almost there, he set his breath ragged. They burst through the final door into the emergency corridor. Fire crews were already streaming in from the loading dock. A firefighter caught sight of them and rushed forward, guiding them toward fresh air. Outside, under the weight of sirens and rain, Evelyn collapsed to her knees, gasping. Paramedics swarmed, but she waved them off her eyes, searching until she found Graham kneeling nearby, his white shirt smeared with ash and blood, his eyes fixed on the burning tower above. You're insane, she coughed, voice shaking. You could have. So could you, he said hoarsely. But you didn't. They stared at each other, both trembling from adrenaline and smoke. Around them, chaos reigned, fire engines, flashing lights, the roar of the city reacting to disaster. Yet in that space between sirens, everything went quiet. He reached out, brushing a streak of soot from her cheek. You saved this company, he said softly. And maybe you saved me too. She laughed weakly, the sound cracking. You're the one who ran into a burning building. You made me remember why it was worth it. His voice was low, almost lost in the noise. I thought I was done risking anything. Then you showed up. Rain mixed with the water, still dripping from their clothes, running down his face. He looked nothing like the untouchable CEO she'd met weeks ago. He looked human, tired, broken, but alive. We have the evidence, she said quietly, but now they'll come for us. Then we face them, he replied. Together. The word hung between them, fragile and heavy with promise. She met his eyes, realizing the truth she'd been avoiding since that first whisper in the dark. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what he made her feel. Behind them, the building burned like a confession too long withheld. Somewhere inside, the servers still hummed the files, safe, the truth alive. As firefighters shouted and cameras began to appear, Evelyn reached for his hand. He hesitated only a moment before lacing his fingers through hers. Their palms were slick with rain and ash, but the connection felt solid, unbreakable. When she spoke, her voice trembled, but not from fear. What now? Graham looked at the flames reflecting in his eyes. Now, he said quietly, we tell them everything. And though smoke still hung heavy over the skyline, the first light of dawn began to push through the haze, a promise that not everything built from fire has to burn. By morning, the fire was out, but the damage was everywhere. The news cycle devoured the story before the smoke had even cleared mysterious Blaze Delay's Harrison Tech's IPO. Cameras lined the streets, reporters speculating about corporate sabotage and insider fraud. The board demanded answers. Graham and Evelyn spent the night in separate hospital rooms under observation for smoke inhalation, but neither could sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, Evelyn saw flames reflected in the glass, heard the whisper that had kept her alive in that inferno. By noon she was discharged. When she stepped outside, the air smelled like rain and burned wires. A black SUV was waiting. Inside, Graham sat in the back seat, a bandage across his temple, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. She hesitated before sliding in beside him. "They're meeting now," he said quietly. "The board. They want explanations." "And the evidence?" she asked. "Safe. Locked in the legal archive." "You did it, Evelyn." She stared at him, seeing not the CEO, but the man who had carried her through fire. "We did it," she corrected softly. He gave a small nod. The SUV stopped in front of the headquarters, now cordoned off by police tape. They walked past journalists shouting questions. Graham ignored them, his jaw set. Inside the boardroom, 12 executives sat around a polished mahogany table, their faces drawn tight with fear and calculation. The air was thick with tension. Henry Price, the chairman, leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, your company nearly burned down last night. Investors are panicking. Before we lose the IPO entirely, we need to control the narrative. We'll issue a statement blaming a systems malfunction." Graham stood at the head of the table, hands in his pockets. "It wasn't a malfunction," he said evenly. "It was sabotage, internal fraud directed by Titan Dynamics with help from someone inside our network. You have proof?" Price demanded. "We do," Graham replied. "And if we publish it, it will clear this company's name. But it will also expose the false sustainability numbers we've been using to attract investors. Our valuation will drop, possibly by half." Murmurs rippled through the room. "So what are you proposing?" asked another member. "We tell the truth," Graham said. The room erupted in protest. Voices rose, hands waved words. Like liability shareholders, reputational collapse flew through the air. Evelyn watched from the corner, unseen but listening. Price slammed his fist on the table. "You can't be serious. We've worked years for this IPO. Billions are at stake. Do you want to destroy your own legacy?" Graham's gaze didn't waver. "If it's built on lies, it isn't a legacy. It's a monument to greed." "Investors won't see it that way," someone muttered. "They'll crucify you." "Then let them." The silence that followed was sharp. Price's tone softened, almost paternal. "Graham, I've known you since you started this company. Don't throw it all away for idealism. You have a chance to protect your employees, your reputation, hell, your future. Cover the discrepancies, fire a few scapegoats, and move on. No one will ever know." Evelyn stepped forward, then her voice cutting through the quiet. "Someone always knows." All heads turned toward her. She hadn't meant to speak, but the words came out firm, steady. "You can bury a lie, but it doesn't stay buried. It spreads like fire through wires." Price frowned. "And you are Evelyn Moore?" Graham said before she could answer. "The person who uncovered the fraud." A few board members exchanged looks, some impressed, others skeptical. Miss Moore, Price said, his tone patronizing. "You've done commendable work, but this is bigger than your sense of right and wrong. This is survival." She held his gaze. "So was last night. And some of us survived because we chose truth over convenience." The room went still. Graham's eyes met hers, pride flickering behind the exhaustion. "You once told me," she said to him quietly, "that no one should work this hard just to prove they're worth staying for. Don't make me prove it again." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Graham inhaled deeply, then turned back to the board. "We tell the truth," he said again, louder this time. "Effective immediately, Harrison Tech will suspend its IPO and open a federal audit. We'll release the findings publicly." Price's face drained of color. "You'll bankrupt us." maybe Graham said. But at least we'll be honest when we do. The meeting dissolved into chaos, half the board storming out phones, buzzing with damage control calls. But in the center of it all, Graham stood still, calm, resolute. When the room finally emptied, only he and Evelyn remained. The city stretched beyond the glass walls, glimmering with indifferent beauty. "You just detonated your empire," she said softly. He turned toward her. "It was never mine to keep. Maybe it's time someone else rebuilt it." She shook her head, eyes wet. "You didn't have to do this for me." "I didn't," he said. "I did it because I finally remembered who I wanted to be." He took a step closer, and the professional veneer fell away. "You reminded me that truth isn't the opposite of love. It's part of it." She looked up at him, her breath catching. "So what happens now?" "Now," he said, almost smiling. "Now we survive the aftermath." The media storm came fast and merciless. Within hours, news outlets ran with headlines about corporate whistleblowers and executive bravery. Some called Graham reckless, others called him righteous. But inside the chaos, something unexpected happened. Employees began sending emails, quiet, grateful messages, thanking him for choosing integrity over profit. The public sentiment shifted. Harrison Tech's stock fell, but its reputation rose. People began calling it the company that told the truth. A week later, Graham received an email from Titan Dynamics' legal office. Derek Blake had been detained pending investigation. The news hit Evelyn like closure, wrapped in cold relief. That evening, as the sun sank over the skyline, she stood by the window of her apartment, staring out at the city. Her phone buzzed. A message from Graham. "We lost the IPO, but we kept our soul." She typed back, "That sounds like a win." His reply came a minute later. "Then meet me tomorrow. There's something I need to tell you." She smiled faintly, her reflection in the glass merging with the golden lights outside. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small or afraid. She felt seen. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: she had chosen truth over comfort, love over legacy, and somehow that had made all the difference. The world moved quickly after the fire, faster than either of them could keep up. Investigations were launched, statements issued, headlines spun. "Billionaire CEO exposes corporate fraud," one read. "Whistleblower or martyr," read another. Graham Harrison had become both hero and cautionary tale overnight. Harrison Tech's IPO was suspended indefinitely. Yet the company's name, once associated with sterile efficiency, now stood for integrity. Investors who fled at first began trickling back, drawn by public admiration. People wanted to believe in truth again, and somehow, against all odds, truth was now profitable. For Evelyn, the days blurred into long hours of cleanup and press coordination. She was promoted formally to Director of Communications, though the title felt secondary to the responsibility that came with it. Every word she released carried weight. Every sentence could rebuild or ruin what remained. But through it all, she noticed something strange. She missed the quiet. She missed the late nights in the glass rooms when the world was asleep and Graham's voice was the only thing grounding her. He had taken a leave of absence, stepping away from the CEO role to oversee the new independent investigation and the rebuilding of their ethical framework. The office felt hollow without him. On the morning of the press conference announcing Harrison Tech's new initiative, Evelyn stood behind the curtain, her notes trembling in her hand. The room beyond buzzed with anticipation, reporters, cameras, live streams. Then she saw him. Graham walked onto the stage, dressed in a dark suit, no tie, his presence calm and grounded. The crowd quieted instantly. He didn't read from the teleprompter. He never did. This company was built on innovation. He began, his voice steady. But somewhere along the way, we confused innovation with illusion. We thought progress meant perfection when really progress is admitting when we've gone astray. He paused, scanning the audience. What happened here was not an error. It was a choice to prioritize numbers over people, comfort over conscience. And I take full responsibility for letting that happen. The silence in the room was absolute. We will release every record, every audit, every uncomfortable truth. Because honesty, even when it costs us, is the only legacy worth keeping. He gestured toward Evelyn in the front row. And this company owes its integrity to one person, a woman who refused to stay silent when silence was easier. Cameras clicked. She felt her throat tighten, her eyes sting. He continued, Evelyn Moore reminded me what integrity looks like when it costs you something. She reminded me that truth doesn't break love, it proves it. The crowd erupted in applause, flashes, blinding voices rising. But Evelyn barely heard it. She could only see him standing there speaking words that sounded less like a corporate statement and more like redemption. After the conference, reporters swarmed, questions flying like arrows. Graham slipped away quietly through the side exit, and she followed, finding him outside in the courtyard behind the building. The rain had started again, soft and relentless. He stood under the awning, hands in his pockets, watching the city blur in silver streaks. She approached slowly. You meant every word up there, she said. He turned to her, a faint smile ghosting across his face. I did. Even the part about love, she asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his eyes softened. Especially that part. For a moment, the sound of rain filled the silence between them. You didn't have to say my name, she murmured. You could have kept it private. Some things shouldn't stay hidden, he said. Not anymore. She exhaled, her breath visible in the cool air. What happens now? Now, he said, we start over. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folder. Inside were the founding documents of a new initiative, the Truth Fund, dedicated to supporting women who had been silenced or exploited in corporate systems. The first program was named after his late wife, Nora, but the subtitle caught her eye. The Evelyn Project, Transparency Through Compassion. She looked up, startled. I can't accept this. You already have, he said gently. This isn't about me. It's about what you started. She closed the folder, tears threatening to fall. You could have chosen legacy, she said. You had every reason to protect your name. Legacy fades, he said. Love endures. And sometimes love looks like doing the right thing even when no one claps for it. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. You showed me that. The world around them seemed to still the rain, the traffic, the noise of everything else, fading until there was only this moment, suspended between confession and forgiveness. She wanted to say something, but words felt too small. Instead, she reached for his hand. It was cold, damp, trembling slightly. He didn't pull away. You once told me I could rest, she said softly. Does that still apply to you? He smiled faintly. Maybe now it does. She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling. Then rest, Graham. You've earned it. They stood there under the rain, two silhouettes framed by the glass building that had once been a prison of lies and was now a mirror of truth. For the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The next week, the headlines shifted from scandal to redemption. Harrison Tech launches the Truth Initiative. CEO steps down to build ethical future. The world moved on as it always did, but their story remained quiet, steady, unglamorous, but real. On his last day in the building, Graham found Evelyn in the lobby beside the artwork his daughter Lily had donated for the initiative, a simple painting of a control panel glowing with a single light titled Integrity. He stopped beside her. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's honest," she replied. They turned to each other, and for the first time there was no tension, no fear, no distance, just peace. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Telling the truth, he shook his head. "Never. But I would have regretted never meeting you." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You changed everything," she whispered. "No," he said quietly. "You did." And with that, the man who once built an empire on perfection walked out into the imperfect world free at last. 1 year later, New York bloomed again. Spring returned with the same stubborn hope. The city always carried the kind that made even the rain smell like renewal. The skyline shimmered under the morning sun, and inside the renovated Harrison Tower, everything looked different. The walls were still glass, but they no longer felt cold. There were plants in the hallways, laughter in the elevators, and a softness that hadn't existed before. Evelyn stood by the window of her new office on the 38th floor, a mug of tea warming her hands. Below, the city pulsed with life, and for the first time she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. The company had changed, but so had she. The once cautious woman who used to measure her worth in hours, worked and approval earned, had learned that rest wasn't weakness, and honesty wasn't naivety. It was survival. The whisper of the past was gone, replaced by quiet certainty. Her phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screenboard meeting at 6 dinner after G. She smiled. A year had passed since the night the building burned, since the world learned what integrity looked like when spoken out loud. Graham had returned months ago, not as CEO, but as the head of the Truth Initiative, which had grown faster than anyone expected. They'd installed thousands of smoke alarms and funded dozens of transparency projects across the country. He kept his promise to make honesty louder than ambition. When evening came, she stayed late again, not out of duty, but because she loved the stillness of the city after dark. The office lights dimmed automatically, the city beyond, glowing like liquid gold. She sat at her desk reviewing notes for a new mentorship program aimed at young women in tech. The sound of the elevator opening pulled her from her work. She turned and saw him. Graham walked in. Sleeves rolled, no tie, the faintest trace of rain on his shoulders. His presence filled the room quietly, like the return of a melody she'd once forgotten how to hum. Still working late, he said, the corners of his mouth curving into that rare, half-tilted smile she'd come to know too well. "Old habits," she replied softly. "But this time it's not about proving anything." "Good," he said, stepping closer, "because you don't have to." He stopped beside her desk, glancing at the files. "You've done more in 1 year than I managed in 10. We both did," she said. "It just took a little fire to remind us who we were." He chuckled low and warm. "I don't recommend it as a strategy." She laughed, and for a moment, it felt like that first night again. The glass, the rain, the space between exhaustion and revelation. Only now the silence didn't ache. It healed. "You know," she said, "sometimes I still think about that night." "The fire?" he asked. "No," she said, meeting his gaze. "Before that?" "When I fell asleep at my desk." His eyes softened. "And I said something stupid. Something honest," she corrected. "It was the first time anyone saw me in a long time." He looked at her for a long moment, the weight of all they'd survived reflected in his expression. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, What would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night? You wouldn't have, she said. You always stop for the people who need saving, even if you don't know them yet. The air between them shifted, filled with something unspoken but deeply familiar. He moved around the desk, standing behind her chair, his voice a whisper near her ear. You should go home, Evelyn, he murmured, echoing the words from that first night. It's late. She smiled, eyes still on the glowing skyline. And if I don't? He leaned closer, his breath warm against her hair. Then I'll make sure you're not alone this time. Her heart skipped the whisper, sinking into her like a memory reborn. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city stretched endlessly before them, a reflection of every chance they'd taken and every truth they'd refused to bury. She stood and turned to face him. They were close enough that the space between words and touch barely existed. You can rest now, he said softly, repeating the promise he'd once made. I'll be the one staying. She smiled, the tears in her eyes catching the light. Then maybe I can finally dream again. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his thumb lingering near her jaw. You deserve to, he whispered. She reached up her fingers, finding his hand. And you deserve to forgive yourself. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, a gentle storm rolling over the Hudson, the kind that brought rain without fear. They stood there, framed by glass and gold, the city below alive with movement. For the first time, it didn't feel like a world made of strangers. It felt like theirs. He kissed her then, soft and certain, not as an ending, but as the quiet continuation of something that had begun long before either of them understood it. When they finally pulled apart, the rain had begun to fall again, slow and rhythmic against the glass. Evelyn leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath. Strange, she said, smiling. A year ago, we were fighting to keep the truth alive. And now, he asked. Now we're living it. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady, and unhurried. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of rain and paper, and the faint warmth of his cologne. The city beyond them shimmered, and for once the glass walls didn't feel like barriers. They felt like windows to a life rebuilt from ash and honesty. Sometimes love doesn't begin with a spark, she thought, remembering his first whisper. Sometimes it begins with a voice in the dark, reminding you that you're still worth being seen. And as the lights dimmed and the rain traced its familiar paths down the window, that whisper returned not from him this time, but from somewhere within her. You can rest now. You're home. Sometimes love doesn't crash into your life with fireworks or fate or grand gestures. Sometimes it walks in quietly in the middle of an ordinary night when the world has stopped paying attention. It looks like a jacket draped over tired shoulders, a whisper you weren't meant to hear, or a voice that tells you that you are still worth being seen. This story isn't about billionaires or boardrooms or burning buildings. It's about what happens when two people choose truth over fear, when they stop running from what hurt them and start listening to what heals. Evelyn and Graham didn't fall in love because they were perfect. They found each other because they were broken in ways that made them understand what real strength looks like. And maybe that's what we're all searching for. Not someone who completes us, but someone who reminds us that we were already whole before the world tried to convince us otherwise. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever had to start over, if you've ever lost faith in love because it stopped looking like what you thought it should be, I hope this story reminds you of something simple and beautiful. Love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that forgiveness doesn't make you weak, and that the people who truly see you will never ask you to prove your worth. They'll simply stay. Maybe you're sitting somewhere right now, like Evelyn once did, exhausted from holding yourself together. Maybe you've convinced yourself that rest is something you'll earn when life finally calms down. But here's the truth she learned, and the one I want you to carry with you tonight. You don't have to keep fighting to deserve peace. You already do. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop pretending you're fine and let someone meet you where you are, unpolished, unfinished, real. Because the right person won't be scared of your cracks. They'll trace them gently and call them light. So if you've ever had a whisper that changed you a moment, that reminded you that you still matter, hold on to it. Let it guide you back to yourself. And if you haven't had one yet, maybe this story can be it. Maybe this is your whisper. Because love, the kind that heals and stays and tells the truth, doesn't fade when the world gets quiet, it begins there. In the dark, in the stillness, in the simple courage of two people who decide to stay when everything else tells them to leave. So tell me, what was your whisper? What words once made you freeze, not in fear, but in recognition? Share it in the comments below, because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to hear it and realize they're not alone.